Hello, dear chaps from all over Central Europe and also United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's great having you back with us. We are continuing with our series about Great Britain, as it looks like in autumn 2025. Something's positive, something negative, and we are very happy and honored having with us sort of chap from Central Europe himself. We have Villa Tugendhat here, UNESCO monument in Brno, and I'm very happy that we have a British Conservative MP with us, Tom Tugendhat. It's great having you, Tom.
It's good to be with you, Jan.
Just for our audience that is not connoisseur of British politics, Tom is a British Army officer, so he is not only a bad politician, but he is a good soldier. He was serving both in Iraq and Afghanistan before moving to politics. He became MP in 2015. He rose quickly. Foreign Affairs Committee chair 2017. He got reputation to be hard guy and hawk on Russia, China, and cyber threats. It elevated him in 2022 to the government. He was Britain Minister for Security. His focus was counter-espionage and protecting the UK from hostile state influence. Now he is happily sitting in opposition and looking forward coming back. So let's shoot down first question. Once again, Tom, great having you with us.
Good to see you.
Okay, as you have already mentioned, your name, Tom, is well known for the Czech audience because of Tugendhat Villa. And by the way, do you know Lukas Hammer? It's an Austrian politician for the Greens and a grandson of Fritz Tugendhat.
I don't, but he must be a cousin of some kind because we're all, there's not that many of us around, so he must be some sort of a relation.
Okay, I only imagine the family dinner with all the politicians' controversies between you and him because he's from the Greens.
There's a Tim Tugendhat in Germany in the SPD, so there's a range of perspectives.
Okay. So Tugendhat Villa, this is a story of exile, nationalism, collapse of European order. When you look at today's world through that family history, what echoes do you see?
Well, I'm not sure I see echoes. I think I see lessons, and the lessons that I see are that cooperation between our countries is incredibly important, that we can't really, not in a real sense, divorce ourselves one from another. What happens in the Czech Republic, what happens in Brno has an effect in certainly in Kent. It may not have an effect everywhere across the United Kingdom, but it has an effect in Kent. And those relationships count and they matter. So, we need to find ways to work together.
You studied theology, Arabic, Islamic studies way before Western policymakers realized the strategic relevance of political Islam. You studied it and you lived it in the army, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. So how has this studies of yours and also experience shaped your understanding of security challenges now?
Well, I think one of the key lessons is there's a real focus by intelligence agencies, for very obvious reasons, on the things that go bang, if you see what I mean, the event. But very little of the event is standalone. If you look, for example, at the rise of political Islam in Western Europe, and in fact in the Middle East, you see a very clear line from some aspects of political Islam, not all, but some aspects of political Islam towards political violence. And you see the same today out of what's happening out of Russia. The kind of messages of hate that Putin is spreading have led to the wars against, the Baltic states, against the Belarusian people in various different ways, against Georgia, and then eventually, of course, most obviously against Ukraine. This connection between what people believe and then how they act is something that many of us in sort of liberal economies have forgotten. We think everything is, a homo economicus, as though everything is financial. Well, it's just not. The reality is, for a lot of people, emotion, history, the stories we tell ourselves, the identity we claim to have, is more of a motivation to action than finance. Otherwise, why the hell would you fight for Putin? Why the hell would you support political Islam? These things are economically insane.
Okay, as Jan has already mentioned, you served in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a tough Islamic country now. And with about 20 years of insight, what lessons have British politicians still refused to learn about it?
Well, I mean, I think the key lesson is that we have a responsibility to try and shape the debate. We're not just here as soldiers who have a responsibility to, fight a war or whatever it is. We're here as politicians, as people, to shape a debate. And actually, much of the way we tried to shape a debate as Westerners, members of the European Union, and now as independent UK citizens, is either through the military or through aid. And aid just rewarded elites. It really did not very much to see growth in many parts of the world. And what we should have been doing is engaging in trade communities and making sure that we were liberalizing their economies in ways that made sure that everybody had a stake so that they could see themselves as part of a wider identity. Now, that's a lesson that hasn't really been learned nearly as well as it should be. So we've seen a knee-jerk reaction against aid, which I think in many ways is correct. But we haven't seen then the consequential reaction, which is to encourage trading opportunities and commercial connections between countries. It's something that really struck me. I was at the Peter Drucker Forum in Vienna only a few weeks ago, and speaking about politics and business. And what really struck me is we keep hearing about politics and business in the sort of Budweiser sense, if you see what I mean. Do you remember the Budweiser advert of a few, was it months or years ago? I can't remember anyway. But, where they effectively Budweiser were trying to reach an audience by pretending to be something, by going down what's commonly known as a woke line. And of course, that's not what the politics of business is. The politics of business is the cooperation of free people in order to achieve a common good. Now, that's a really important piece of politics. And if businesses could focus on that and stop lecturing people, then I think you'd find that there was a lot more political support for the politics of business.
By the way, you mentioned Budweiser. I hope you meant Czech Budweiser, because for the British audience, Budweis is a town in Czech Republic. So is Pilsen. So, dear British audience, drink good Czech ale, not that American piss.
Well, you know that the UK for a long time was the only country where you could buy both Budweiser and Budvar, because the deal between the two halves of the family, so one half went to America, one half stayed in the Czech Republic, meant that they couldn't be sold in the same place. So Budweiser could not be sold in Europe and Budvar could not be sold in the United States, with the exception of the UK, where the deal was done.
So a little bit of advertising for Brits coming to Czech Republic. Czech Republic, the country with highest number of breweries per capita in the world. Come, it's safe here. And by saying that, you already mentioned that our human experience is not quantitative, it's not Excel spreadsheet, it's emotional. It's history, experience, how we are living our lives. So it's personal. And this is now a big problem in British society, connected to how we as a citizens or visitors of Britain, how we feel safe. And whether it's right or wrong, whether it's true or not, Brits feel less safe today than, let's say, 10 years ago because of knife attacks, organized crime, radicalization. I have it in my family. My sister-in-law, she lived in Elephant and Castle in London, and she just came back to Czech Republic because it was not safe. So from a security minister perspective, what exactly has gone wrong?
So it's interesting. If you look at the statistics, and I don't just mean the crime statistics, I also mean the medical statistics.
Yes.
The number of knife injuries in the UK has dropped consistently
Yes.
over 20
Yes.
years, right? I mean, there's
Yes.
I'm not just talking about crime, as I say. I'm not just talking about the report of crime. I'm just saying the data from hospitals in and around London, actually across the whole of the United Kingdom, is that knife attacks have fallen. There's no debate
That's
about
why I
it.
talk about feeling of
You're
people.
exactly right. But this is why, there's the politics of crime is not the politics of data; it's the politics of emotion, and that's where we haven't, as as Conservatives and now as Labour governments, always got this right. We have allowed a feeling, or we have not stopped a feeling that left people thinking that it wasn't safe to go out. And of course, this becomes self-reinforcing, because if you don't go out, the fear of going out rises, and so on. Now, this is where a lot of the policing action, I'm afraid we haven't pushed back hard enough on. So the police, quite understandably, have looked at the statistics and said, but there isn't a problem here. Because their response is to the crime, not to the perception of freedom of the citizen. And we need to change that around. We need to make sure that actually what is the role of the police is not just the statistics of crime. You can't ignore that, of course, but also the reality of the liberty of citizens. So the perception, the feeling of people like your sister, who presumably before she went back to the Czech Republic, spent many evenings wondering whether or not to go out for fear of the actually unlikely reality of crime.
Well, when we are talking about how people will feel safe in Britain, there is a lot of talks about relationships between migration and criminality. So my question would be, is the current model of migration policy in UK sustainable in this current environment of how people in Britain feel unsafe?
No, it's not, and that's pretty clear. And this is where, again, you can look at the statistics, and it's certainly true that if you compare like for like, so I don't just mean every migrant for every Brit, because of course migrants tend to be young men, and so you've got to compare young male groups with young male groups. You can't compare young male groups with older female groups or whatever. The comparison doesn't work. If you do that comparison, actually migrant communities are a little bit less likely to be involved in crime than native British groups. But the reality is that doesn't matter, in the sense that if you go to somebody's house, the fact that you're a little bit worse behaved than their kids is not an excuse. The reality is you have to be better behaved, and we all have that intrinsically in our feelings that the reality is that you can always tell a child from an adult. Children are worse behaved with their parents. Adults are better behaved with their parents, because there's that feeling that you have to behave to a standard that is acceptable to those who you want to impress. And that's where we haven't got this right. And now there's also the very simple point that, well, change is part of life, right? I mean, we're all subject to change in various different ways. The reality is that many, many people feel uncomfortable with rapid change. And so while you can change a society slowly over 50 or 100 years, the same change over 5 can cause real concern. And what we've seen under Boris Johnson's administration was a very quick level of migration into the United Kingdom, almost a direct reverse of the European migration. So Europeans, Czechs, Poles, many others left, and many people from the former Commonwealth came, and that sudden change has been surprising to many.
You once supported annual cap of around, let's say, 100,000 net arrivals. Is that still realistic for economy that relies heavily on foreign labor?
Yes.
What's the pros and cons? How to do this?
Well, look, it's completely realistic, but you can't do it just by doing a control on foreign labour. What you've got to do is you've got to change what Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are doing, which is effectively paying people to stay at home. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the latest budget figures, but people have been crunching through the numbers over the last few days. Effectively, if you have 3 kids and you're on welfare, your equivalent salary needs to be £71,000. Now that's double the median income. I mean, that's a huge salary for most people in the United Kingdom. And it means that you're better paid than a captain in the army, a major in the army. You're better paid than many serious professional people, right? So it's not sustainable. So what you need to do is you need to change the fact that it is possible to be on welfare for long periods of time. Not only is it bad for the society because you end up having to resort to migration in order to fill labour shortages, but it's bad for the individual because, of course, at some point this is going to be proved unaffordable. My guess is it's going to be proved unaffordable within the next 12 to 18 months. But actually, even if it's in 5 years' time, the reality is those people who've been left on benefits will have no other options because It's very difficult to get people who've been on benefits for many, many years to return to the labour force. It's very hard to change the psychology of somebody who's been used to receiving in that way into somebody who's used to contributing, and that's really difficult. It's not fair on them.
When you talked about changes in the regional structure of migration under Boris Johnson administration, do you think that does it have any concrete consequences, even security ones, economic ones, or political ones?
Oh, I'm sure it will, but I mean, it's very early to say. It is clear that whenever you have changes in demographics in a country, it brings consequences, some good, some bad, right? My guess is that the arrival of Hong Kongers, for example, will be a net positive. I suspect very much that it will bring an entrepreneurial attitude and a culture that will see growth in areas that we simply didn't expect. Now, because we don't expect it, I'm not going to predict it. But but there will be other communities, other areas where we'll see that the culture will be less amenable to cooperation in the UK, and it will cause problems, and we'll have to deal with those.
I am a bit lost now in my computer.
Maybe
Uh,
we can move to
yeah,
hybrid threats and to China, which is one great circle of questions. So, hybrid threats were a constant theme during your time in government. And which of the following is, in your opinion, most underestimated in the British security community? AI enabled disinformation, foreign influence operations, radicalization at home, or weaponization of infrastructure.
So, forgive me, I think the first three are roughly the same thing. They overlap so strongly. The last is something that we look at very carefully. The weaponization of infrastructure is clearly, when you see, for example, what Russia has been doing in the Czech Republic. There was an explosion a few years back in an arms depot. There's no real question that was the KGB who did it. We've seen evidence of Russian sabotage in the United Kingdom, again in a factory that was supporting some drone production. And we've seen various attempts at assassinations, including in Montenegro, in London with Litvinenko, and in Salisbury with the Skripals. We know that the weaponization of infrastructure is, I'm afraid, something that the Russians have done for many, many years. And this new incarnation of the KGB, whatever it calls itself today, the SVR, the Kremlin mafia, you can call it what you like, is continuing the same thing. Now, for the other three, if you like, AI-enabled disinformation. Well, that's a tool rather than an outcome. Foreign influence operations is exactly what we know that Russia, China, to a certain extent Iran, but actually other countries as well are beginning to do. And it's leading to radicalizations at home. Now, some of this radicalization, when it's spread by others, can be to things like political Islam. Other areas can be to sort of pseudo-fascist right-wing extremism. So Russia is very, very active, for example, in supporting far-right white groups across Europe in a sort of blood and soil idea. So the idea that Russia is somehow anti-fascist is a complete lie. They are the biggest supporters of fascist groups across Europe today. And by the way, let's not forget, it was Russia and Nazi Germany who together invaded Poland and started the Second World War. So the idea that Russia is inimical to Nazism is just factually untrue. So it is a real alert to all of us that what we're seeing is AI being used in order to spread disinformation, in order to drive radicalization at home, in order to achieve foreign influence.
let's move to China. It's exactly 10 years since President Xi rode with late Queen Elizabeth II in golden chariot through the streets of London. Not 100 years, 10 years only.
Mm.
But you've been the clear voice in the parliament on China all the time. So since you entered the house, so how you see the changes 10 years ago? Hey, let's hug China, kiss kiss hug hug, business, special bond. And now 10 years later, Washington is on steroids when talking about China. Even Germany sort of woke up. So how you see this change inside the political class?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, 10 years ago, there was a reasonable bet. It was not one I agreed with, but it was a reasonable bet to say, look, what's happened with Hu Jintao, look what's happened with the various different leaders uh, of China over the last sort of 10, 20 years. Economic progress has led to some form of liberalization. Let's not overstate it. There's still 1989 and the Tiananmen Square massacres, and there's still many political prisoners, but, the economics have liberalized some aspects of Chinese life. Well, Chairman Xi has just made that completely obviously not true. Now, he didn't make it obvious immediately. I mean, many of us were deeply suspicious. Forgive me if you've been in Prague in 1989, as I was, and you've seen the forces of communism against protesters and know what the fear that this could turn ugly feels like. You never believe that a communist state is anything other than a violent dictatorship. I mean, I'm afraid it is always the same. It may change face, it may change style, but the reality is it is a brutal murdering machine in order to keep control. Now, I don't need to lecture anybody in Central Europe about that, but in the UK, people had forgotten it. And the reality is that what we've then seen is Chairman Xi feeling strong enough, or maybe feeling it's urgent, that he reestablishes the control of the party, that somehow or other it was running away from him. And so, the change in some ways, it's predictable, but it's deeply, deeply saddening, because actually all of us want to work with China. I mean, China is an extraordinary civilizational power, like India, like America, like Europe, that has seen many, many remarkable achievements in its soil and amongst its people over centuries. But instead of that, what we've got a machine for control that is holding back the Chinese people and is now trying to influence people around the world. And, you spoke about Germany. I mean, Angela Merkel made 3 appalling bets. The 3 biggest decisions she made, she got fundamentally wrong. The first was outsourcing her energy needs to Russia. Okay. The second was outsourcing her manufacturing to China. Okay. The third was outsourcing her migration policy to Hope. Okay.
So, but what to do with it in these times? Because Western countries talk about the risking from Beijing, but not decoupling, which is a little bit different, I suppose, from the US attitude, which tries to really decouple from China. But how is it possible when you realize that even British pharmaceutical companies invest in Chinese pharmaceutical industry in the high stands? So what to do with it? How to solve this question?
Well, look, I think it's a really important question. You talk about pharmaceuticals, you're absolutely right. If you were to buy a weapon system, for example, made in the United States, all of those parts, including the circuit boards, would be made in the United States. If you were to buy the same weapon system, or rather a similar one, a similar one made in Europe, there's a very good chance, not definite, but there's a very good chance that circuitry will be outsourced, printed in China. I mean, this isn't serious, right? I mean, we're not serious countries, and now we're complaining that the US are ignoring us on Ukraine. The reality is, we're not being serious. So, serious countries don't complain they're being ignored. They do something about it and make themselves unignorable. And I'm afraid that's not what any of us are doing. So we've got a real wake up moment for Europe. Germany's starting to talk seriously about it. Poland is up to 4-5% and is actually being serious. The Baltic states are being serious. But that's pretty much it, really. Let's be honest, that's pretty much it. Everybody else, particularly France and the United Kingdom, keep talking a good game and you're nowhere near it. So, the reality is what we need to be doing is thinking about how do we friendshore, not just offshore, because China also makes things that we are simply not willing to make at the moment. So when you look at rare earths, they're not rare. You can get plenty of rare earths in Europe or Canada or Australia or whatever. It's refining and manufacturing them, or sorry, turning them into usable products that's difficult. Well, if we are going to constantly tie ourselves up with regulation, then we're never going to do it. And this is where I'm afraid, uh, much as I don't like to speak ill of other people's organizations, the European Union arguing itself to be a sort of a regulatory powerhouse. Well, that's literally the negative. It's like saying you're a racing car driver who knows how to use the brake well. I mean, sure, you're never going to win.
Uh, if there is one topic where Britain can be really proud, one security topic, it's Ukraine. Whether your government, so conservative government of late Rishi Sunak or now Keir Starmer, I think that Britain can be really proud of its support to Ukraine. From if we look on a problem from multiple data sets, two countries can be really proud: Germany and Britain. Like the massive help
Mm.
since the war started, military, financial, political, diplomatic, really Germany and UK. Of course, big kudos to Nordics and Balts and Poles and Czechs as well. But really, you guys doing a lot. Unlike, for example, our friends in France, they talk a lot, not do much. In your case, is completely reversed. Unfortunately, war is still going on. Do you think there is still a will in your country, a will
Yes.
and money and capacity to support Ukraine?
Ah, you asked different questions there. A will, yes. It's quite striking how you go around the UK today, and I go around the area that I'm lucky enough to represent, and you'll see Ukrainian flags, new ones. I don't mean ones that have been there for 3 or 4 years. I mean new flags outside churches, sure, but also outside people's homes, and there's a general support for Ukraine. And actually, there's many Ukrainians, as you may know, who came to the United Kingdom when war broke out in 22, and in various different ways have stayed. Some have gone back in some places, but those who've stayed are very happily integrated as part of the community. There's really no issues, and many people are exceptionally generous, still housing, still hosting Ukrainian families or kids or partners or whatever it happens to be. The second question is harder to answer because the reality is, if you spend years, as sadly we have done, not refilling your war stocks, not retooling your factories, not putting out the orders to the defense manufacturers, which is, I'm afraid, what we've done, then you end up dependent on US political decisions because you simply haven't paid for a seat at the table. And the reality is, Europe hasn't paid for a seat at the table. Yes, Britain did a lot at the beginning, and Germany, you're absolutely right. Germany's financial contribution kept Ukraine going, until today, and has been phenomenal. And other countries have also done a lot. But the reality is, that doesn't match the reality of 400 million people. It doesn't match the reality of the European economic output. I mean, the idea that Russia is a threat to industrialized Europe is ridiculous. I mean, Russia is a broken state. It's a mafia regime with a petrol station. I mean, its only tool of leverage is energy prices, and energy prices, if we put our mind to it, would be falling very quickly because we would deregulate nuclear. We would massively increase our energy production and other means. But I'm afraid what we're seeing a Russia that is serious, violent, brutal, utterly criminal, but serious, facing a European Union that is not, and a UK, sadly, that is not serious. So while we have done enough to help, we haven't done enough to be the partners that lead Ukraine to the freedom that it deserves.
The war in Ukraine is, by the way, also about two visions of the world order. Global North versus Global South. And that takes me to the next question. Do you think that we are entering a genuine bipolar world order?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's really interesting. If you look at the way the world is structured today, there's some really important tells, if you like, in gambling terms. One of them is look at AI, right? I mean, I know there's been a French AI in Mistral, and there's been various sort of, DeepMind is in the UK. But let's be honest, there are two AI systems. One is Chinese, one is American. That's it. If you look at the way in which satellite technology is developing, yeah, I know ESA exists, and there's a European Space Agency and industry. The reality is, there's Starlink and there's something Chinese, right? That's it. And at some point, Starlink, maybe Project Kuiper with Amazon as well, but maybe there'll be two Western companies that do it, will operate all the telecommunications networks over Europe, because actually phone masts are difficult and expensive and satellites are cheap. And so you'll end up with two phone networks globally, one American, one Chinese. I mean, I'm sure there'll be a European one. It'll be very heavily subsidized. It'll never launch anything, and the regulations will mean that it can't operate in most of Europe. I mean, you can see how it goes. And so what we're leading to is, in that sense, a bipolar world. Now, it is perfectly legitimate to think that the Chinese answer is a better answer. It is also legitimate to decide that you want to support it. But I think if you are going to support it, you need to realize what it is that you're supporting. Because I'm not hostile to China, and I'm not just hostile to communism because it's a brutal system of government. I'm hostile because it naturally fails. It succeeds for a while, by the way. Let's not forget that in the 70s, the Soviet Union looked like a prospering economy, looked like it might overtake the West in various different ways. But it is naturally going to fail. And it's going to fail because centralized control of resources always lose to the free ideas of free people. They just do. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, but it always fails. And so if you're siding with China, what you're actually siding with is you're siding with increasing control, increasing centralization on Beijing, and increasing loss of sovereignty for yourself and for your allies. If you're siding with the West, and none of us are blind to the problems of the United States, not just today, but over the last 70, 80 years, right? As America's closest ally, we love them dearly, but we know their faults. And the reality is, the US have achieved something remarkable over 80 years. They've achieved a completely decentralized empire where, yes, you have to buy into certain aspects of it. Of course you do. But actually, the points of failure are so many, so diffuse, so different, so disparate, that actually any one of them can fail and the others will sustain it. So in one system, the Chinese system, you've got a bicycle wheel with a central spoke. If it fails, the whole wheel collapses. In the US system, you've got a fishing net with 1 million knots. Each of the knots is a strength in itself. And if one fails, don't worry, there's another one next door.
Donald Trump's return reshaped the strategic environment. You always, as a Brit, you got this special relationship with the United States. But should London prepare for more volatile, more transactional, more different United States?
Look, I think the United States has always changed pretty sizably between presidential administrations. I mean, this is admittedly a bigger change than most, but it's not the only one. There's been some pretty tumultuous times in the United States, and we weather the storm. And the reason we weather the storm is because we have a very, very deep relationship. I think when people say the special relationship, it sounds like it's a relationship between Number 10 and the White House. It's not. The reality is, I served in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq with half a dozen congressmen and senators. And by the way, I'm not unique, right? Most of our army, most of our intelligence services, many of our business people, many people in the UK have a very, very deep personal relationship with many, many Americans, and vice versa, right? It's just a very easy relationship. That's what makes it special. So does the White House often cause us problems? Does Number 10 often cause them problems? Yeah, sure. But the reality is it's much deeper than that.
Yeah. Before the finish, I would like to move back to the island and to your inner policy. The Conservative Party is in the probably deepest crisis in its modern history. And from your point, what is the reason, or the single most important reason, why traditional conservative voters no longer trust your party?
So the biggest problem is migration. There's no question about it. The biggest problem is migration. When Boris led the Leave campaign. When Boris Johnson led the Leave campaign, he promised control, and he then opened the doors. And fundamentally, that's really hard to recover from. Actually, I think that the Conservative Party offers genuinely today the only economic way out for the United Kingdom. I mean, you just saw Rachel Reeves's budget, which is effectively taxing people more to give to people on welfare. I mean, it's an extraordinarily regressive budget, which is punishing people for working, whether they're at the bottom end of the earning scale or at the top end. It doesn't matter. Either way, you're losing. And then you look at what the other parties are doing. I mean, the Greens are frankly insane. They're led by somebody who thinks that you can increase the breast size of a woman by hypnotizing her. I'm not joking. He really does. And you've got the Liberal Democrats who don't seem to know what they stand for on anything. And you've got Reform, which although is leading very strongly on migration issues, its economic policies in many ways are further left than Jeremy Corbyn. Big nationalisation, big amounts of state control. In some ways, not terribly dissimilar to Trump on that. Trump is the first president for a long time to have nationalised industries, or at least taken a government stake in industries in a way that, I can't really imagine any president since the New Deal having done in the last 70, 80 years.
Well, you guys on a conservative side, you are lucky that Labour is even worse shape, honestly, than you guys. So the last thing what Labour wants to do is to call for early elections, and because we are still sort of in the beginning of election cycle, so we will see more turmoils, which gives you ability to do something with the party. And at the same time, you rightly pointed out, if we look on the data, yes, Nigel Farage is leading big time. Migration is a topic, but when anyone asks him for anything else, then nothing is coming
There's
out
nothing
from
there.
him.
Yeah.
So this gives you some time and hope. Also, problem might be that maybe the traditional cleavage, left, right, Labour, conservative, doesn't work anymore. For example, in Czech Republic, there is no Labour Party in the parliament; it just evaporated. In a few other countries as well. So you have a radicalization, and then you have sort of a melting of ideas connected with some populist leader. So what do you think, Tom, is the recipe for you guys? Let's say you have next 3 years to rebuild the party, regain the trust. What's the recipe that you will show to British electorate?
Well, funnily enough, I think Kemi started doing it. So Kemi took over the leadership of the party about a year, just over a year ago. And if you've seen, the first 6 months were difficult. I'm not going to lie to you. They were really difficult. And she was finding her feet. She was finding her voice. But if you look at what she did in the last few weeks, you can see a really big change. So her attack on Rachel Reeves' budget was clear, it was honest, and it set out a different alternative. If you look at the speech that she gave at the conference, it was the first proper explanation of conservative values that I've heard given from a conservative leader in about 10 years, which tells you something, really, doesn't it? And the thing that she's setting out, and completely correctly, is that fundamental question that electors ask themselves after a period of office is, do you feel better off? Now, there's no way anybody's going to answer yes at the end of this time of Labour. And so what Kemi is setting out correctly is the economic changes that we need to see in order to allow people to feel better off. So, stamp duty allows people, of course, to save money on a housing transaction, but it's not about that. It's about the labour mobility that allows people to grow a business, to move around the country and to find opportunity. When you look at the attack that's been made on the welfare issues that the budget has pushed forward, it's not that people want to be cruel to people. No, nobody wants to be cruel to people. But the reality is that taking off people who work in order to support people who don't work is not just unfair on those who are working, because what you're doing is you're limiting their resources to support their own family, but it's punishing those who aren't, because it's turning them into slaves of the state. We know it's bad for everyone. And so this pretend kindness of the left is actually showing itself to be more and more cruel.
Okay, the final question is on me. When you look at all the domestic threats, all the risks in Europe, in Ukraine, in the Middle East, whatever, what keeps you up at night, and what is the one security risk in Britain that your country is not prepared and is not preparing up?
So for me, it's very simple. It's democracy. All of our countries do not have a high enough participation rate in democracy. Now, I know people will point to elections and they'll say, well, we got a whatever 60, 70, 80% turnout at the last election, and therefore people are engaged in democracy. It's not enough, I'm afraid. The reality is democracy is how we talk to each other. It's how we engage with each other every day. So joining a political party is not a statement that you support everything that party does. It's a statement that you want to see your society progress and you're willing to put in the time and effort to shape the debate that chooses candidates, chooses policies, and chooses outcomes. And I'm afraid the reality is that in Europe and actually across the democratic world, too few people are actually engaged in that process. Now, it's difficult. I get it. I mean, you don't need to tell me. You have to lose quite a few evenings talking to people you may not necessarily choose to have spent the evening with, and you have to spend you have to spend a lot of time engaging with ideas and with concepts that you may either think are absurd or you may think ridiculous or whatever it is, and you have to do it. But I'm afraid the reality is our countries, Czech Republic, the UK, the US, France, Germany, whatever, are far and away the most powerful countries that the world has ever known. They are incredibly powerful, both in cultural capital, in military capability, in economic possibility. And yet we are hamstringing ourselves because we're not willing to talk about the issues that really matter. And then we turn up at the polling station, the election, once every 4 or 5 years and complain we don't like any of the candidates. Well, you had 4 years to shape that choice and you chose not to take it until the last second. Well, guess what? It doesn't work. And so actually the big thing that concerns me is none of those threats, because none of those threats are meaningful if we have a democratic conversation that keeps us together. If we don't have that, it doesn't matter what the threat is. It could be anything. It could be absolutely anything. We will tear ourselves apart. So that's my big concern.
That was Tom Tugendhat, former soldier, veteran, foreign and defense expert, and currently MP in British Parliament, who has a ties to Central Europe, from where we are airing our podcast. Great having you, Tom. God bless.
It's good to see you both. Thank you.